rise like water, gonna turn this system around. In the voice of my great-granddaughter, climate justice now. People gonna rise like water, gonna turn this system around. In the voice of my great-granddaughter, climate justice now. People gonna rise like water, gonna turn this system around.
In the voice of my great-granddaughter, singing climate justice now. People gonna rise like water, gonna turn this system round.
Extinction! 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 What do we want?
Climate justice!
When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
Climate justice!
When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
Climate justice!
When do we want it?
Now!
System change!
Climate change!
System change!
Climate change!
System change!
Climate change!
We must decide climate justice now. People gonna rise like water, turn this system round. In the voice of my great-granddaughter, climate justice now.
What's your message to world leaders today?
My message is that we'll be watching you. This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you are doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
What do we want?
Climate justice!
When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
Climate justice!
When do we want it?
Now!
What do we want?
Climate justice!
When do we want it?
Now!
Power to the people.
Power to the people!
People got the power.
People got the power!
Tell me, can you hear it?
Tell me, can you hear it?
Getting stronger by the hour.
Getting stronger by the hour.
Power
purpose of being here today for me is to highlight the emergency to the BBC and to get the BBC to start telling the truth. They need to act as if it's World War III and they need to work on a World War III scale. In World War II, the BBC were really helpful to the British public and had their well-being at the front of the queue, whereas now we're in an emergency that threatens us more than anything has ever done before. We're talking about the 6th mass extinction and the BBC simply are not reporting on it enough. Hundreds of us were arrested in London, forced to sleep in squats and other people's spare rooms, couches, whatever, to have our democratic right to be able to protest, and the BBC reported on nothing. They've got no impartial interviewing or reporting when it comes to Extinction Rebellion, very little anyway, and they need to start stepping up. They've got a public duty to fulfil, to advise the British public and the wider public on the emergency, and they're not currently doing it. There was 1,870 arrests and the BBC basically didn't report on it at all. If you found any other group that went out and protested where there was 1,800 arrests, they'd have done a panorama on it, do you know what I mean? It's Extinction Rebellion purely. They've been told by the media to keep quiet and their mouths are currently taped up. Governments are scared of mass panic. They don't want the public to know the truth because they know when the public know the truth, they're going to expect and demand that the government start acting, and the governments aren't interested in acting at the moment because they're too interested in things like Brexit and lining their own pockets and their own. The truth is that we're in a climate emergency. We're currently passing tipping points that we're not going to be able to go back from. We're going to see weather systems coming in like we've never seen before. We're going to see floods, mass food starvation, we're going to see mass migrations. We could potentially become extinct, truly. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, is my answer to that. I've been with Extinction Rebellion for about 8 months, and once you know, you can't unknow.
That climate change is just about the young. I speak for the old as well as the young. And I've been a lifelong trade unionist, building a global communications network as an engineer, and I've seen how the world changes and can change. Your message and my message in the Green Party is the world will continue to change, and it'll change around you, and you need to pay attention to that change, because our behaviour, whether we like it or not, whether we intend it or not, is damaging our future. We will see the combined effects of wind speeds, rainfall and drought combine in the next 3 decades, never mind beyond, to bring to Britain and here in Stoke-on-Trent food shortages like we've never experienced, famine that has the potential to make the Second World War seem like a tea party.
Something we see all over the world, right? Teaching people about the environment, about our natural world. It's science, it's facts. And tell the future. The government communicate the severity of the ecological crisis and the necessity to act now to the general public. We can talk about this in our local area, for example. Newcastle-under-Lyme has declared climate emergency last year. What have they done since? Nothing, right? Climate emergencies are being declared all over the world. It's a step in the right direction, but it's not a big enough step. We're only at the bottom of the staircase. Demand 3 of telling the future, allowing governments to actually talk about this stuff, is the need to actually push actions forward, get legislation through that'll come out with greener transportation, better public transportation, right? Just in Stoke, for example, our bus system has been destroyed by the public. Buses have been getting worse, more expensive. They need to be accessible and green. And the final demand, empower the future. That's what we're doing right now. We're out here for future generations, right? Not only future for our children, but other people's children. Not only for children, for seniors, for adults, for anyone, right? This planet is here for us, for the natural environment. Let's protect it, right? If we're here and using all the resources, what are we leaving for the future, right? We might not be living through that future, but we can still care, right? We might have families, we might have friends. We should care about those people. So
Hi, I'm Demi. I work Environmental and Facilities Administration, but I've been in environmental for just over a year. I was asked just over a year ago by one of my managers if I was interested in environmental. I said I was. Obviously, as I learnt more about it, I got more passionate and realised how important it was. And that's obviously what encouraged me to go further in it. I am part of Friends of the Earth and the Woodland Trust. Woodland Trust gave free trees out. They've donated 60 trees to the YMCA and we planted them. Friends of the Earth work on several different things, whether it be trees, animals or general just trying to tackle climate change. I think if we don't do something now, it'll be too late and there'll be nothing left for our children or our grandchildren. Well, if we don't do anything about the CO2 levels, more ice caps will melt, which will cause the sea level to rise and eventually just cause more and more floods and natural disasters. A third of it's caused by agriculture alone because we deforest to make space for the cows and the animals, and obviously the methane produced by that also damages the climate as well. You've also got the CO2 emissions from cars, from general fires and all sorts like that. I think everyone needs to make a little difference, whether it's cutting down on meat, reducing paper, recycling, just every little bit can make a difference. Only if we act now. We've only got so much time. It was estimated 30 years to make a difference before the Paris Agreement, but obviously with the bushfires now, it's going to reduce it drastically. With the Paris Agreement, obviously a lot of countries are now following suit and realising how important it is. Obviously some are a little bit stubborn about it, and I think if more and more countries do it, the faster other countries will agree to follow the same guidelines and just work together rather than constantly fighting over something such as money. The Paris Agreement is a general agreement amongst all the government to make a conscious effort on policies that will be more environmentally aware, to look into the environmental damage that something can cause rather than focusing on the policy towards money.
Yeah, my name's Tim Harris. I'm a senior lecturer in physical geography with a specialism in sort of long-term climate change regarding sort of Earth's evolution. Okay, we get very detailed pictures. We have a very good idea because of cores that have been taken in places like Greenland and in the Antarctic, where annual snow layers get turned into ice. And inside the little individual layers of ice, the bubbles are trapped. And so we've got hundreds of thousands of years worth of snow layer after snow layer in Greenland and in the Antarctic. These little bubbles, which are little samples of the atmosphere at the time. And so that enables us to work out what gases have been in the atmosphere over time and how it has fluctuated. Now in terms of greenhouse gases, we all heard of CO2, but actually one of the more important greenhouse gases is water vapour, because that actually traps heat. And methane is another key greenhouse gas. And without them, life on Earth would be impossible. We need gases to trap the heat that doesn't directly come from the sun. The sun puts in shortwave radiation, it heats up the ground, and long-wave radiation, which is what we feel as heat, is trapped by these gases, and it keeps the Earth at a nice temperature so that the sea isn't frozen all over the planet, or it doesn't boil away into space, which is what has happened on Venus. So it keeps the Earth nice. But then there are these fluctuations, and we have evolved, all life on Earth has evolved to live within a certain temperature bands. And we know that over the last 2.8 million years, climate has been fluctuating really quite wildly, and the pattern is demonstrated by rises and fall in CO2 and methane that's been revealed by these ice cores. So we know that climate does change and does flip for various reasons, some of which are to do with the way we orbit the sun over long time periods. So sometimes we're going to be cold, sometimes we're going to be warm. We're currently in one of those little warm periods. And even during this little warm period, climate does fluctuate. Sometimes a little less CO2, sometimes a little bit more. And this is all natural fluctuation, and we're happy with that. It's just that since we started exploiting fossil fuels in particular, it has been noticeable through these ice core records and other records that CO2 levels are rising and rising alarmingly. And even when we go back through previous warm periods, the rate at which CO2 is now apparently rising and the levels that it is reaching is greater than any of these other little warm periods for at least 500,000 years, if not more. So we're reaching levels of CO2 concentration that we haven't seen on this planet for a very considerable time. And it's not happened over thousands of years, it's happened over decades. And this is the worrying factor, that we've got, although we've got all this evidence about what used to happen in the past, we've got no analogue for what is happening now. So there's a bit of guesswork, but it doesn't look good. Right, so these tipping points would be triggered not in the next few decades, this could be centuries ahead, if we continue to produce more and more greenhouse gases and do nothing to combat rises in temperatures and rises in greenhouse gases. So some of the tipping points that have been suggested are things like the complete melting of the Greenland ice sheet. It's not imminent, but it could happen. We are seeing changes in the behaviour of the Greenland ice sheet now, which means that it's thinning. We're getting more rapid ice streams in some places on the Greenland ice sheet, and potentially in a few hundred years, maybe thousands, all the ice might disappear. Now, some of the other tipping points we've mentioned are a bit more serious and perhaps a bit more imminent and I think one of the biggest challenges facing the Earth at the moment, and not many people understand this, is the melting of the permafrost across the whole of northern Eurasia, across Canada. There is more carbon stored in these areas, frozen and locked away, than the rest of the carbon stores that we've got in the world. And if that permafrost melts, it encourages microbes to start digesting all the carbon that's locked in there, and they digest it and they convert it into methane. And this would be catastrophic, and it's happening now. And then there's some of the other events, such as the El Nino event, which we occasionally see. But we've got in the not too distant past evidence of El Nino not just lasting 1 or 2 years, but lasting 1, 2, 3, 4 decades. And when El Nino lasts for that long, catastrophic events have happened in Central America, what is now the southern United States, massive desertification. All that rainforest just disappears. And it has worldwide consequences. El Nino has these impacts on the Middle East and global climates. It can actually, weirdly, causes Northern Europe to get a lot colder in the past. So all these other events can start to happen. Certainly we are the only time in the Earth's history when an organism has burned fossil fuels. Okay, so we are obviously putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. It is a greenhouse gas. It is going to have an impact, and there cannot be any argument about that. Then there are the secondary impacts, which we don't know enough about how the Earth system works. Certainly in the short term, the likelihood is that by putting more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, you're going to warm the atmosphere. We've been burning fossil fuels increasingly since the 19th century, particularly now since we have to talk about the Second World War as being a main tipping point. There's been great acceleration since the end of the Second World War in terms of the amount of fossil fuels we're burning. And its consequence won't be immediate, but we've suddenly noticed 3 or 4 decades later, temperatures are rising, and rising rapidly across the Earth. And there's no disputing that. So the relationship between what should happen if you put CO2 into the atmosphere and what is happening, i.e. temperatures should rise, and they are rising. There's definitely no conflict over within scientific circles. We are warming the atmosphere because of what we are doing. And your question about whether humans can then do something about this is, I would like to hope that we can do something, but is hope enough? And I think we need responsibility, instead of just saying, don't worry, because as a species we have overcome problems. It's why we've evolved during this period of climate change. Instead of evolving into a different species, we evolved a big brain that enabled us to adapt to rapid environmental change. So we are a species that has evolved to deal with this, and that gives you perhaps grounds for optimism. But whether we've actually gained true wisdom is another thing. We need to realise what we're doing, combat it, and combat it seriously, and hopefully we'll also make some technological advances that will help us to regulate the CO2 that we have put into the atmosphere and just bring it down a little bit. I think the Earth will do it itself in the end, but the Earth won't do it quickly, the Earth will do it slowly. And in the meantime, the Earth may react in such ways that soils become unproductive because of drying out all over the place, and the amount of land being available being reduced by rising sea levels, etc., etc. That the Earth cures its problem by getting rid of humans, as I hinted at earlier, and that is also something that needs to be realistically tackled. That, you know, we've got finite resources, we've got finite land. There is a lot of untouched stuff out there, but if we keep doing the wrong thing, our potential to do the right thing in the end is going to be diminished. Well, that's my fear anyway. There's potential that we have well mapped, well documented areas that are prone to desertification, and as climate warms globally, the problem of desertification will increase, particularly in certain areas of Africa, but also Central and South America, where essentially the ability to grow crops disappears. So this puts pressure on the remaining land. There are other things that are happening, and you've got to put everything in context. So what is also increasing is urbanisation. So people are leaving the land and going to the cities, and cities are getting bigger and bigger. But that does mean that actually the land can be used in a different way. And so ultimately it is probable that the world will be able to feed itself, where you have these mega cities, 90 to 95% of the world's population living in them, relatively few people living out in the countryside but able to produce food. But that's going to be an earth organised in a very different way, and a society organised in a very different way to what it is now. The transition from one to the other almost undoubtedly will lead to starvation, will lead to yes, mass migration, and a lot of really negative impacts on soils and on people, and is almost certainly going to become a big problem. It's not just famine, but also droughts that often lead to famine, but water as a resource is going to become an enormous political issue, because water is becoming more and more scarce in these areas that are vulnerable to desertification. And water is annoying, it flows in rivers, and rivers do things like cross political boundaries. So one country might say, oh, we're building a dam to build one, so you're reducing the amount of water that's going downstream. And this then, it's war, it's going to lead to warfare. So that there can be all sorts of other spiralling things, which is beyond the realm of my studies as a physical geographer, but you do have to be aware of potential consequences that could stem from climate change. But it's not definitely going to happen. We need to always bear that in mind, but be aware, you know, this could happen, so why not try and do something to prevent the worst possible scenarios?